The galaxy was already fracturing, fissures running through the core worlds like veins of rot beneath glittering marble. From the high observation decks of the Council Spire, I, Archivist Tethral, watched the slow decay of once mighty empires. The Auric Dominion, vast and imposing, now creaked under the weight of overextension. Fleets scattered across the void, rebellion flickering in distant sectors like dying stars. Rumors twisted through the council chambers, whispered warnings of a warlord who would seize dominion not through diplomacy, but through blood and terror. Every cycle, the air felt heavier with the inevitability of collapse. It was then, amidst this stifling tension, that a derelict vessel drifted into Dominion space. Charred beyond recognition, its hull pitted and scarred by uncounted battles, it emitted fragments of signals, odd, static-laced, almost laughable in their simplicity. The council dismissed it as barbarian noise, yet I could not forget it. The cadence, the insistence, gnawed at my thoughts. Something in it suggested not just survival, but defiance. In the months that followed, scattered reports surfaced, fleets encountering small, agile human craft that moved with an uncanny precision. They were flesh and bone, yet they fought like predators cornered by extinction. I watched holofeed after holofeed, humans improvising in the heat of battle, adapting on the fly to tactics no one else could withstand. Diplomats claimed them reckless, strategists called them fools. But in those encounters, I glimpsed something else: resilience that bordered on obsession, audacity that dared the galaxy itself to blink first. Fear of them spread quickly, not for their numbers, they were few, but for what they represented, the unknown variable capable of rewriting destiny. Humanity stepped into a galaxy already teetering on the edge, carrying the weight of its own recklessness. They moved without fear, unshackled by ancient grudges, unbound by the old rules. Even now, as I record this chronicle, I feel the tremor that began that day, a subtle shiver beneath the veneer of order, the moment when fate's balance shifted, not because the galaxy changed, but because something new, something human, had arrived to challenge it. The storm was coming, and it wore a human face. The first official encounter with humanity was etched into memory as a disaster no archivist could ignore. I observed it from the Council's observation chamber, heart thrumming in a rhythm that mirrored the pulse of the Auric spear. An unauthorized human vessel had penetrated Dominion space, small, unarmed, insignificant by any metric. Yet what came next defied comprehension. Rather than comply, the human craft executed a maneuver that should have been suicidal, a direct hull breach docking. Sparks flared across the docking bay, alarms screaming through the flagship, and still they pressed forward. The crew moved with terrifying precision, bodies torn, armor scorched, yet every motion deliberate, every action calculated. Improvised breaching charges detonated, shattering reinforced doors, and through the smoke and debris emerged a leader, Captain Reyes. She staggered onto the command deck, one arm grotesquely twisted and crudely splinted with emergency rations packaging. Blood smeared her uniform, yet she held herself upright, spine rigid against pain. Weapons trained on her, we braced for violence. We expected threats, rage, insubordination. The phrase echoed through the flagship and beyond, carried by sensors and comms, spreading like wildfire to every corner of the Dominion and across the galaxy. These humans, few in number but immense in will, possessed a ferocity unlike anything since the extinction of the war beasts of Ythar. But their strength was not in rage or brute force. It was in conviction, an unyielding refusal to yield, to submit, to be broken. The Dominion faltered. Hesitation rippled through the ranks. Other species, distant observers, glimpsed hope where none had existed in cycles. And beneath it all, a tense silence held the galaxy in a breathless pause. Humanity, injured, cornered, half dead, refused to bend. Their defiance carved into the very bones of the Dominion a fear more potent than any weapon ever wrought. And in that moment, I understood. The balance had shifted, and nothing would ever be the same. The galaxy had found its reckoning in human form. While the galaxy fixated on humanity's audacity, a far darker presence gathered strength in the outer rim. I watched the reports come in, grainy and chaotic, detailing the march of the Crimson Sovereign, a warlord whose name alone sent shivers through even the hardiest fleets. System after system fell beneath his shadow, civilizations turned to ash, and survivors fled, their cries echoing through the void. The Dominion's supposedly invincible fleets failed repeatedly, routed by his relentless strategy and the almost preternatural coordination of his forces. In the council chambers, leaders raised placid voices, offering platitudes and hollow reassurances. Yet I recorded every tremor in their tone, every subtle falter. Morale crumbled quietly, like sand slipping from the hourglass of a doomed empire. And then came the first human encounter with the Sovereign's vanguard. At first, the news seemed impossible. Reports detailed a small human contingent engaging forces that would have annihilated entire fleets of other species. Yet not only had they survived, they had protected alien civilians in the process. The losses they sustained were catastrophic, injuries so severe that other species would have disintegrated under their weight. I watched the combat footage again and again, humans sprinting toward collapsing buildings, dragging the wounded into makeshift safety corridors, squads charging enemy lines while shattered, bleeding, and disoriented, refusing to yield an inch of ground. Their resilience defied logic. I could not categorize it. Were they fools, heedless of survival? Martyrs, sacrificing themselves for a cause too vast to comprehend? Monsters, perhaps, tempered in a crucible the galaxy had never seen? Whispers began to spread among the outer colonies and fleet captains alike. If these humans could endure the firestorms of the Crimson Sovereign, perhaps they could turn the tide of the war entirely. Strategists debated in hushed tones. Diplomats speculated in shadows. Even among the war-hardened Auric generals, uncertainty grew like a cancer. And so, humanity was thrust into a war they never sought. A war against a tyrant older than most civilizations, whose cruelty was measured in centuries and whose disdain for humans was palpable. He called them primitive bipeds, dismissing their potential entirely. Yet in doing so, he underestimated something fundamental. For humans did not bend. They did not falter. Each time the Sovereign's fleets tried to crush them, each time his fire rained down, humanity rose again, bloodied, battered, yet unbroken. Across the rim, their presence became a spark, and sparks ignite fires. I recorded every instance, every desperate stand, every impossible survival. The galaxy watched silently, holding its breath. And beneath it all, I felt the first tremors of something far greater than a battle won or lost. The humans were becoming a force that could not simply be ignored. In the shadows, the Sovereign seethed, dismissive at first, then increasingly frustrated. Every failed attempt to eradicate these primitive bipeds became a stain upon his reputation, a crack in his armor of terror. History would remember this error. Even he, with all his cunning, could not foresee the consequences. Because humans, cornered and bloodied, were only beginning to show the depth of what they could endure. And the galaxy, for the first time in cycles, glimpsed not a dying species, not a fleeting anomaly, but something enduring, something that would not yield, not to fear, not to tyranny, and not even to fate itself. The outer rim burned. Refugees whispered of miracles and monstrosities in equal measure. Fleet transmissions carried the word that humans survived where others could not. And I, Archivist Tethral, felt the weight of inevitability settle over me. The war that had consumed centuries was about to meet a storm unlike any we had imagined. The Sovereign's rage would come, humanity's resolve would meet it, and the galaxy would tremble at the consequences. I was present in the Galactic Senate that day, perched in the observation gallery high above the polished marble floor. The chamber was alive with the low hum of politics, the murmured negotiations of 1,000 species, each vying for influence, for survival, for scraps of legacy in a galaxy teetering on chaos. And then the tremor came, a vibration so violent that it ran through the marble beneath my feet, rattling data consoles, quivering the stoic statues of long-dead chancellors. The chamber door slammed open with a force that echoed like a cannon through the vaulted hall. Delegates shrieked, some clambering over benches, others frozen in disbelief. Guards trained energy rifles on the intruder, weapons crackling with lethal anticipation. And through the haze of fear and incredulity, a single human stepped into view. The sight would haunt me for cycles to come. The human's armor was battered, scorched, visor shattered, one arm hanging limp at an unnatural angle from combat damage. Blood seeped through torn fabric and dented plating. Yet they moved with deliberate calm, an unshakable purpose that cut through the chaos like a blade. In their remaining hand rested the severed head of the Auric Emperor. You must understand the magnitude. The Emperor was not merely a ruler. He was a living legend, a tyrant whose iron grip had bound the Dominion for centuries, untouchable, eternal, or so we believed. The very sight of his head rolling across the Senate floor, leaving a dark smear on pristine marble, shattered centuries of perceived invulnerability. It stopped at the base of the Chancellor's podium, a grim punctuation in a theater of disbelief. Then the human spoke, voice hoarse and strained, yet carrying across the chamber with clarity that froze every heart. He sold out half the galaxy to the Crimson Sovereign. We ended him. The reactions were instantaneous and explosive. Delegates fainted. Security forces hesitated, unsure whether to attack or defend. Some species erupted into argument, shrill with outrage, while others stared with silent awe, recognition flickering in their alien eyes. The balance of power, the equilibrium held for millennia, shattered in a single heartbeat. And yet, amid the panic, I, Archivist Tethrall, felt something entirely new: inevitability. The weight of destiny had arrived, clad in bloodied armor, wielding both judgment and clarity. Humanity did not plead for trust. They claimed responsibility. They carried a burden that no empire, no council had dared lift for centuries. I watched as the Senate struggled to recover, voices trembling, floor tremors continuing an echo, realizing that the rules had changed. The humans forced the galaxy to confront its cowardice, its inertia, its reliance on symbols and empty rituals. For the first time in memory, action had replaced debate. That day marked the true beginning of the Pax Humanum. It was not a proclamation, not a treaty, not a negotiation. It was a fact. The galaxy would never be the same again. Humanity had entered the stage not to participate, but to command the narrative. As the chamber descended into chaos, whispers spread that this species, small, mortal, fragile, and yet unbreakable, would determine the course of history. I recorded every tremor, every shudder of disbelief, knowing that the story of the Emperor's head would echo across cycles, a warning and a promise intertwined. The Senate would never be the same again, neither would the galaxy. And in that moment, I understood a simple, terrifying truth. Humans did not wait for permission. They acted, and what they acted upon would reshape the stars themselves. The galaxy erupted. The Senate incident, the human who had marched in and dropped the Emperor's head, was the spark, and chaos became an inferno. Fleets mobilized across countless star systems, old alliances rekindled in desperation, and ancient grudges flared as rival factions attempted to claim advantage in the new order. In the midst of this maelstrom, humanity emerged, not as conquerors, not as diplomats, but as reluctant leaders, guiding the fractured galaxy through a storm no one else could weather. The Crimson Sovereign, sensing the shifting tides, unleashed his final campaign with a ferocity that defied imagination. Entire sectors ignited under waves of plasma fire, while drone swarms, constructed from technologies so ancient and lethal they defied the Dominion's records, scoured the void for any sign of resistance. Worlds fell in hours that would have taken cycles in older wars. Entire species vanished, their colonies reduced to ashes and radio silence. And yet, in every engagement, the humans, few in number, heavily outgunned, bleeding but unbroken, struck back with a ferocity that seemed almost supernatural. I pored over battle reports, my ocular interfaces unable to process fully what I saw. Radiation storms that would have disintegrated the toughest Auric soldiers barely slowed human forces. Vacuum exposure, extreme thermal flux, psychological weapons designed to fracture even the most resilient minds, humans endured it all. One report detailed a strike team that navigated a collapsing asteroid field, ripped open by the Sovereign's artillery, and continued their mission while several of their members were incapacitated, eyes clouded by decompression trauma, lungs scorched by oxygen deprivation. They survived because they could not accept extinction. Some said humans were cursed, that the galaxy had imbued them with unnatural endurance to see its end. Others whispered that they were chosen, destined to rise above mortality and reshape the cosmos. I believed neither. They were neither tools nor miracles. They were stubborn. They were will incarnate, refusing to bow, refusing to die, refusing to abandon one another, even in the face of annihilation. The siege of Luminous Gate became the legend by which all future conflicts would be measured. A colossal space fortress, once thought impregnable, now trembled under the Sovereign's relentless assault. Humanity's Marines were outnumbered 10-1, surrounded on all sides. Reinforcements were delayed beyond comprehension. Every moment the fortress held was a miracle, every life rescued an act of defiance. I watched the holofeed as soldiers carried civilians across corridors riddled with fire, shrapnel, and collapsing bulkheads, all while knowing their own lives were forfeit. And they did. They fell. They died by the thousands. And yet, the meaning of their deaths spread further than any fleet, any weapon, any empire. Civilizations that had watched from afar, hesitant and terrified, found inspiration in humanity's sacrifice. Recruitment surged, fleets reorganized, entire colonies pledged their loyalty to human command, not out of submission, but out of belief. Their courage became a rallying cry, their defiance became doctrine. Even the Crimson Sovereign could not comprehend it at first. He had anticipated fear, chaos, retreat. He had anticipated surrender. But humans did not behave according to logic. The harder he struck, the more relentless they became. Fleet after fleet, colony after colony, the humans endured, bled, and persevered. Every failure to crush them was a testament not to their luck, but to their unyielding spirit. By the time he realized the truth, by the time the Sovereign understood that humanity could not be broken, the war had already shifted. The galaxy itself was turning, currents flowing toward human-led strategy, toward hope, toward resistance. The very forces that had seemed invincible now faltered under the tide of stubborn willpower. What had been a campaign of terror became a battle for survival, not just for humans, but for the countless species that had joined their cause. I, Archivist Tethral, recorded every step of this transformation. The strategy meetings aboard human command vessels, the improvisations under fire, the audacity of soldiers leading suicidal boarding operations, the civilians inspired to fight despite the overwhelming odds. I observed how the humans turned every disadvantage into leverage, every setback into a lesson, every death into motivation. The War of the Sovereign Star, once predicted to be the final annihilation of thousands of species, had become the crucible in which humanity forged the galaxy's destiny. And as I documented these events, I realized that no empire, no fleet, no weapon could undo what had begun. Humans had changed the war. the galaxy, and the very meaning of survival. The Sovereign's fury would continue to burn, but it was now a reaction, always one step behind the relentless tide of human resolve. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the battlefield, I felt a certainty I had never known before. The galaxy had found its impossible defenders. The war was far from over, but humanity had already won in ways no one had anticipated. No historian, no matter how meticulous, could ever fully capture the final assault on the Crimson Sovereign's throne system. Yet I was there, embedded with the Allied fleet, drifting among the shadows of dying stars as we warped into the heart of his dominion. The void itself seemed poisoned, choked with the wreckage of countless civilizations he had devoured. Planets shattered, fleets pulverized, and the debris of entire cultures floated like macabre ornaments, reminders of his centuries-long reign of terror. At the center of this devastation loomed his citadel, a black star fortress radiating crimson light so intense that sensors bled static, feeding the minds of the fleet with distorted images and false readings. It was a fortress designed not for survival, but for intimidation, a monument to a tyrant who believed he was untouchable. And yet, as the fleet approached, I felt a tremor, not of fear, but of inevitability. Human strike teams led the charge. Small, agile ships darted through corridors of concentrated fire, weaving between turrets and missile arrays that had obliterated entire armadas. I watched in disbelief as battered human vessels rammed shields, hulls screaming under impossible stress, emerging on the other side like phantoms. Boarding parties breached impossibly high angles, scaling vertical shafts and venting sections to vacuum without hesitation. Their movements were chaotic yet precise, improvisation dancing hand in hand with discipline. When the humans breached the throne chamber itself, I held my breath. The Sovereign waited, colossal, armored, ancient, a living monument to terror. His presence alone warped the chamber, gravity twisting unnaturally, energy fields distorting the very air. He struck with centuries of experience, wielding weapons that could fell mountains and fleets alike. But humans did not retreat. They did not hesitate. They did not falter. The battle was brief, violent, and definitive. It was not strength alone that defeated him, nor weapons, nor strategy. It was human will, their refusal to abandon one another, their refusal to let a single tyrant dictate the fate of billions. Strike team after strike team pressed forward, sacrificing themselves without hesitation, each fall only strengthening the resolve of those who remained. And then, silence. The Sovereign fell. The psychic scream of his death echoed across light years, a vacuum of terror collapsing into relief. Ships trembled, sensors flared, and for a moment, the galaxy itself seemed to exhale. Humanity emerged from the throne room carrying none of the glory, only the wounded, only the living who had survived impossible odds. Behind them, the citadel burned, crimson fire licking the void, marking the end of an era of oppression. From that day forward, every species in the galaxy understood a truth we could no longer ignore. Humans do not win because they are the strongest, nor because they are the fastest, nor the most technologically advanced. Humans win because they rise when all others have fallen, because they endure when all others break, because, even in the face of certainty, they refuse to yield. And in that enduring, relentless refusal, the galaxy found hope and fear. The fall of the Crimson Sovereign did not bring fireworks nor proclamations of victory. Instead, it brought a silence, a pause in the galaxy's endless turmoil, and then the slow, deliberate weaving of a new order. This age, now known as the Pax Humanum, unfolded not with domination, but with careful, relentless reconstruction. Under the Peacekeeper Accord, authored jointly by humans and surviving galactic leaders, old conflicts sharply declined. Star piracy, once rampant across outer sectors, collapsed almost overnight. Black markets, long thriving on the chaos of war, withered in the light of new enforcement protocols. Interstellar academies blossomed, sharing research and innovations across species that had once treated one another as expendable tools. Humanity did not seek dominion. They did not demand obedience. They simply acted, stepping into roles no one else would assume. They became the reluctant anchor of stability, not because they craved power, but because the galaxy's survival required it. Other species, initially suspicious, gradually came to trust them, not for their victories, nor for the terrifying legend they carried, but for their unwavering commitment to life itself. The cultural transformation was subtle yet profound. Alien art, once dominated by the grim depictions of war, began to reflect the tenacity and resilience of humans. Diplomatic academies incorporated Terran negotiation techniques, studying the audacity with which humans brokered peace even while their fleets were battered and their civilians endangered. Hope, for the first time in centuries, began to outpace fear. Yet beneath this fragile calm, a question lingered, a shadow even archivists like myself could not fully ignore. What happens when the species that saved the galaxy begins to grasp the full measure of its own influence? Humanity, resilient but cautious, had not yet fully explored the reach of their power. And though for now they remained humble, destiny has a way of hunting those who carry it. Across the galaxy, their influence became apparent in the smallest gestures and grandest reforms. Human engineers rebuilt decimated sectors with astonishing efficiency, often incorporating alien designs and ideas into their structures. Starship crews coordinated multinational missions with a precision born of experience, training, and a stubborn refusal to fail. Even during celebrations of victory, humans deferred credit to the countless species that had aided them, demonstrating a humility that was almost foreign to the war-weary galaxy. And yet, for all their humility, the presence of humans reshaped every corner of civilization. Policies once dictated by fear and ambition shifted toward pragmatism and cooperation. Planets previously fractured by interspecies strife began to coordinate trade and defense. The very ethos of governance changed. Leadership was measured not by conquest, but by the protection and preservation of life. The Pax Humanum is not an era of dominance. It is not the reign of a single species over all others. It is an era of guardianship, of stewardship born from necessity and courage. Humanity carries the scars of their battles, the memory of every sacrifice, yet they do so quietly, their deeds rippling across the stars without ostentation. And still, the galaxy trembles from its wounds. Systems rebuild, refugees return, fleets are refitted, and the echoes of old wars linger in empty stations and shattered orbital colonies. But the galaxy stands. It stands because a species from a forgotten blue planet refused to let it fall, because humans chose to rise when all else had fractured, and because they understood that survival was only meaningful when shared. Historians may debate their methods, philosophers may question their motivations, and some may fear the growing influence they wield. Yet one truth remains undeniable. The galaxy's heart beats stronger because humans endured. Because humans, in their stubborn brilliance, answered the call destiny laid before them. And as long as they stand, the stars are not lost. They are watched over, guarded by a species that has learned what it means to rise after everyone else has fallen. The Pax Humanum is a fragile promise, a covenant between species stitched together by fire, blood, and unwavering resolve. And somewhere, deep in the archives of memory and legend, the record is clear. The galaxy was saved not by the strongest, not by the fastest, but by humans, because they refused to let it die.